What's up, everybody? I am Levi Brickley, your host with the Pursuing Truth podcast. This is another awesome part of boundaries, because boundaries are important. So we're going to talk about developing boundaries.
Yay.
Yeah. I like this series, though. I feel like we've had some very good conversation about this.
Yeah. And it brings up, oh, golly, I still am not over getting my boundaries straight.
Oh, golly, gee, golly, gosh. All right, guys. Well, before we get started and dig into some of these awesome topics, we actually have like 23 points to hit on in the outline today, which that's quite a bit. It's not, I think the first couple we only had maybe 14, 15.
Yeah, so. But we're in the part of child rearing with boundaries.
Yeah. So what you're going to get from this episode, guys, is, let's say if you are a single father, a single mother, or maybe you are parenting with a significant other. Doesn't seem to be that popular these days. A lot of kids are growing up without a parent in the home and only having a single parent home. And it's really too bad. But this is going to be applicable to your parenting. And of course, I got the mastermind of parenting here, my mother, Kim Mattern. And we're gonna have a stinking fantastic time. Make sure that you guys follow us on Spotify, leave an Apple Podcast review, and if you enjoy the video quality and enjoy the conversation Mom and I are having, please subscribe on YouTube, as those things, all of them, are vital to the growth of the podcast. And at the bottom of the description are links to all of the social media accounts. There's also a link to Apple Podcasts, so you can leave the Apple Podcast review. We'll see a lot of growth from that, and I do appreciate those of you who have left reviews. It's huge. It's huge.
You need to show me where that's at. I might leave a review for you.
Yes, my mom. Yes. All right, so like we kind of discussed in our little exhausted intro there, the book in chapter 4 starts talking about parenting styles and how important they are to develop quality parenting styles that will inhibit boundaries later on in adulthood. There's a married couple, Jim and Alice, and Jim is a hardworking, normal American father living his American dream, has done very good in the movie industry and has moved up to operations manager. And over time, he's developed into a mindset where he's able to say no to his family, but not say no to his employer. Right. And I think a lot of parents really struggle with this. Where do you find that balance? Because really that's what boundaries is about, right, is finding balance within your life of being able to say that yes, being able to say that no. And I think, there's this gradual transition into establishing those boundaries. And this is an important takeaway from Jim and Alice's situation, is because he's not at home. He's not there to assist Alice in establishing the boundaries in the kids' lives. He's essentially just like any absent father in a home, even though he's providing financially.
Right. And even as a single mom at home, I had that problem too, because again, from childhood, my feel good came from what I produced. Mm-hmm. And so, you know as well as I do, my house had to always be cleaned. Things had to be done a certain way. I was a little OCD. And that was all stemming from, that's where I got my good feels from. So I didn't know how to say no to, hey, let's take a day off and not clean house on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, but you also had to provide structure too. Right. And so you providing that structure taught the children discipline. And I think, that's a key aspect to quality parenting is giving that structure and discipline, which we're going to dig into later. But that the problem is when there isn't that balance, right? And we're not keeping the home clean. We're not teaching the kids to fold the laundry, or the mom in the married relationship is the only one doing it.
Right.
And it's like, well, where's that love and help in the relationship from the father or the husband. And so this gradual transition is important to recognize, because it really starts at a baby, baby.
Yeah, very young age, very young age.
What were like some of the things that you had to do at the very beginning, say when I was born, because we're twins. I got a twin sister.
Yeah. Yeah, and the older siblings played a very vital part, because during that time I worked night shift, and so I worked all night, come in the morning, get all you kids up, well, not you babies, but got the older kids up, got them ready, got them off to school, and I only got to sleep when you guys slept or when your dad was awake enough to take care of you. Our home had to have structure in order to function, and fortunately, that's one thing I probably did pick up from my parents, is that they were very worth ethic people. And so I knew that in order, not that it was just a job, but I also knew that transposed over to the home life, as far as I knew we had to be on some kind of a schedule. Everybody had to have a job or it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And so I started very early teaching you kids chores. And, and finding too, it's kind of like one of those things. I know this sounds silly. The struggle for me was finding each one of you kids' personality and traits and what you were good at. Like, for instance, when I ran the daycare, you and Lauren were 2 when I started the daycare. Rusty was very good with kids. Good with kids.
Yeah, I remember that.
So he would help with the daycare kids. I mean, he would take care of diapers. He would take care of the work part of that. And here's Caleb was the clown of the family. And he was great to entertain them. Like, he would take them out, in the afternoon before nap time. He would make obstacle courses for the kids or come up with some kind of games with them or entertain them during that time. And so, but I seen those in the personalities of everybody. And so Daisha didn't do much interacting with kids. She was more upstairs helping me in the kitchen or helping do housework or, stuff like that. So it was seeing those things in each one of you and trying to build on those strengths that you had in helping me be able to run the household.
And I think, that's a blessing in disguise, the dynamic of having multiple kids that can all assist you along the way. And so you are able to kind of give them particular tasks that give them the meaning in that aspect of life at that time.
Right.
How did you develop, say, a relationship with God with the children?
With the first 4, until my first husband and I got divorced, we were in church every week. But we were one of those typical families that we went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Kids were in the programs, but there really wasn't a whole lot of meat in the home. I mean, we didn't do Bible reading with you kids. We didn't pray with you kids. And I even carried that in with you guys. I think the difference is that when I was a younger mom, I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. I had him as my savior. I knew God existed. I knew that Jesus died for me, but I didn't have that relationship with him. Mm-hmm. And I think as you kids started growing older, I had a relationship with Jesus. And so having that relationship with Jesus was easier for me to be more open to you kids with my faith and
taking
stuff.
the time to set aside to make sure that you spend time with Jesus and that we understood.
Yeah.
The importance of this is because, like we've established in episode 3, about God has boundaries.
Yes.
And so because God has boundaries, you can pull representations all throughout the Bible of different boundaries that were established.
Right.
Take Job, for instance, when God said essentially to Satan, you can do anything you want to him. You just can't kill him. So he loses his family, he loses his livestock, he loses his wealth, he loses all of his friends. He's a lonely man, he loses his health and then develops leprosy, and then he's cast away from society and he has no development into so you see that boundary that God set with Satan, but knowing that ultimately that boundary has a purpose at the end of the day to provide protection. And protection is what's so important. And so Psalms 139:23-24 says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive ways in me, and lead me in the way of the everlasting." And I, of course, the word that's going to stick out to me is anxious. I'm anxious.
Yes.
And we live in a culture where so many people are living this anxious life. Am I going to be a good enough mother? Am I going to be a good enough father, wife, husband,
Am I
son,
doing this
daughter?
right?
Am I doing
wrong?
this right? And so because God, like I said with Job, established that boundary with him and Satan and Job, in this dynamic, God's also establishing boundaries in our purpose and our meaning. And so our reliance on him and his leadership and his guidance in our life is providing us the protection that can potentially result in bitterness, resentment, and maybe that anxious and depressed life.
Yeah. I know I was probably more of an anxious person during the first 4, simply because I hadn't even matured yet. I didn't know all that I knew later. So when I had you kids, I still had anxiety. I had anxiety with financially providing for us. I had anxiety sometimes of finding time for me, to have alone time to just reflect and rest my brain. So there was anxiety, but the sweet thing about the relationship, having a relationship with Jesus, and I'll tell you one of the things that, after we had to leave our house here in El Dorado and move to an apartment, which was upsetting for all of us. It was our home, and but my health wasn't where it needed to be in order to keep working the hours that I was working. And I remember waking up at night having, they were anxiety attacks, basically. And
what were you so anxious about?
well, it was a transition, I had started a new job. I hadn't worked outside the home. I'd always been home with you kids. And working outside the home, I didn't have skills because I had never gone to school. I didn't have, skills. And fortunately, and it was just God's provision for me, was that a lady knew me from a twins group that I had joined. And she knew I had great organizational skills, and they needed somebody in the office that could organize their supplies and plan the Christmas parties and plan the, company things and stuff. Mm-hmm. And that was my first corporate USA job.
What was it like your first day going in?
Very nervous. I knew nothing, basically nothing other than emailing on a computer. Nothing. I didn't know Word document. I didn't know Excel. I didn't know nothing.
See, my anxiety would be like me talking constantly and sounding like an idiot to all of my coworkers because I wouldn't know how to communicate with everybody. I get anxious about that. Like I do, like, believe it or not, like I get behind this microphone, but I'm sitting in the studio by myself. So I don't have social anxiety here. I don't have social anxiety when I post it because I've done so much content creation, but you get me in a crowd of people or a new group of people that I know that I'm going to be around on a consistent basis. I always have like this anxious part of me that, like, I don't really want to fully open up, or like, I don't know how to carry myself and all of those things.
I still have that.
Yeah.
I mean, I have anxiety too. People don't know that. People don't know that when I go into a room full of people that I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
But I trained myself to put that aside and push through.
Yeah.
A lot of choices in that was I had no choice. I either had to learn to be able to communicate with people, because now I'm in corporate USA. Mm-hmm. I was having to make decisions. I was having to present to the people at the job, is this what you're wanting? Is this what we're going, And so I had to push through and, be honest with you, pretend I knew what I was doing.
Right.
And so, and I think that came from, just God putting me, and, I used to feel really sorry for myself and get on that pity party sometimes about being a single mom and struggling with, because, bottom line, I didn't have a support system. My parents didn't live close. I didn't have aunts and uncles, cousins, there just wasn't a way there. And so really the people in the church was somewhat my support group, even though they weren't there day-to-day life at home. But God put me as a single mom and gave me a brain enough to learn, to push through some of those things. And, you kids did get the butt end of some of it. When I was very high anxiety, that's when my anger would get a little bit best of me. But, it does take a disciplined life, and you got to choose to be disciplined.
Yeah.
So, and that's when we go back to developing boundaries with your kids. I had to set boundaries because I couldn't be there every minute of every day. And you guys, and part of learning boundaries was allowing you kids to be who you were. I'm going to give you an example of a boundary with Rusty at 2. And this is where you're learning, he was a quiet baby, very good baby, and toddler. Wasn't too, he didn't go through those terrible twos. But I realized the first time that it was really cold outside, he wanted to go outside and play with the other kids. And I said, you got to get your coat on. And he says, no. And I go, you have to wear a coat. And he said, no. And so I said, then you're not going outside. This kid was 2 years old, and he stood by the front door almost 2 hours. 2 hours. Refusing to put the coat on.
He was that stubborn?
He was that stubborn at 2.
Holy cow.
So I knew at that moment, this one's going to be a challenge. That this one's going to I got to listen. Really, Rusty, I think, is the one that taught me the most about accepting my kids for who they were and letting them go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And from that day on, I realized the kid didn't like fur. I mean, I learned that. The reason why he didn't want to put his coat on is he hated fur. And it had a fur lining. So then after that, it was like everything had to have a nylon or a silky kind of lining in it and stuff. But even then, as a teenager, he'd be walking down the street in sub-zero degree weather in Kansas, and he might have a jacket on and he had shorts on. And I realized the kid doesn't mind the cold weather. So was I going to fight him every day about wearing a coat and jeans and gloves and hat? No. He taught me how to say, it's okay. He'll know when he's cold and he needs to put clothes on. He was old enough to figure that out.
Like at this time, you're saying yes.
Yeah, I'm going, okay.
Because I think, and this is crucial with any type of relationship, not just parenting, is that there's a sense of compromise that's found in relationships. Right. And that's a compromise that you made as he's standing at the door. You were holding your ground, which you should hold your ground. But there's also that test in you of at what point do I say, okay, well, I'm not going to win this one. Right. And then also understanding that at 2 years old, he wasn't able to articulate why he didn't want to wear the coat and communicate that effectively to you to be able to make a change to that nylon inner coat. And that's crucial, though. When you think about a relationship and a husband and wife are having disagreements, that in that disagreement, there's a lot of things that are hidden underneath the rug, per se. Right. And they aren't found out yet because maybe we haven't taken the time or have had the ability to be aware in ourselves yet to allow that to come out in a healthy manner. Instead, a lot of times we respond with that, well, you did this, well, you did that, well, you did this, you did that, instead of taking the moment to maybe walk away and have a sense of patience with it, knowing that there's deeper things embedded here inside of me that I need to communicate better for further understanding. Mm-hmm. But also, one quote that Grandma used to always tell me was, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So in that time of taking that break, maybe there's that openness that's also developed from that now maybe she is more open to the conversation about this particular issue within the marriage. that although you're not supposed to get to a point of being overly selfish about your boundary either.
Right.
There's a balance here.
Right.
I always tell people with anything, let's say like a recent episode that I did was on dating expectations, was to develop this hierarchy list, right? Like what's the most important thing that you will not compromise on? And we need to do that with our boundaries as well. This is one thing I absolutely will not compromise on. These things down here are less important, and therefore I can make that compromise.
Another example of a compromise. When Lauren was a teenager and I was remarried, and she noticed that my husband wasn't washing the dishes the way I had taught her to wash dishes. So she says to me, I can't believe you let him do it. I said, he's an adult. He's offering to wash the dishes, and that's not a battle I'm choosing to pick. Well, you would have never let us kids get away with it. I was teaching you. I don't have to teach him. Mm-hmm. You know, and so that was a boundary in a sense of age-appropriate boundary. I made you kids wash the dishes, wash them properly, and wash them the way you need to as a learning tool. I don't care how you wash them now. And they're your dishes.
Right.
You know, but telling her, that's not a battle I choose to pick because he's not crossing a boundary for me.
Right.
I may not like that he doesn't do the dishes the way I do the dishes, but hey, he's doing the dishes.
Your expectation of perfection can be detrimental to the relationship, right?
Yes.
I mean, if you
Yes.
were that constant nagging wife all the time, like, oh, you didn't clean this good enough, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You're never actually going to find the satisfaction in that relationship. So that's one of those things that would be lower on that list. Yeah, do you wish he would clean it better? Maybe, but that's just not something that you're willing to pick.
But that's something that I know as myself, that I'm a little bit on the OCD spectrum. That's my issue.
Right.
My expectation, what I want, doesn't mean somebody else has to meet that. And so that to me is a boundary. Yes, there's things drawn on the line.
How do you develop, like, so boundaries, they don't just come out of nowhere.
No, they don't.
They are built. I mean, like we used a representation of a fence the other day.
Yes.
It's not like you just wake up one morning and the fence is there.
Right.
You have to build the fence. So what are some dynamics of single parenting where you were able to build that boundary?
I felt most of my childhood, there was no structure. My parents fought a lot, very violently, fought a lot, and yet they were so focused on each other and the things that were wrong with the marriage. Those kids pretty well took care of ourselves. We did. We just took care of ourselves. And then going into foster care, a little bit more chaotic, you know. So I just grew into that. And one of the things, you know, it talks about in the Boundaries book is the 3 different growing levels as a child. They talk about the hatching, where the baby and the mom are as one person, not separate, that the baby's totally dependent on that mom. And I was one of those moms, and I don't know how I got this, to be honest with you, but I hated the thought of putting Brock in the baby bed and letting him scream himself to sleep. That bothered me. But my mom said that's what I needed to do to teach him that he needed to go to sleep. I think it was detrimental to him as he grew up because there was a lack of that nurturing that he missed that I could have been giving him as a baby. And another traumatic thing for him as an infant was that Daisha was very sick. So I spent a lot of time with Daisha at the hospital and stuff. So there again, that hatching part of that connection with me as his mom was broken a lot, you know. And so when I look back, I think that that was a very detrimental time. So I really encourage moms now, hold your babies if they want to be held. You can't hold your baby enough. You're not going to.
There's the, essentially you're avoiding, right? You're avoiding, like, cry yourself to sleep. Like, you'll get over it.
You're isolating them, you know.
They're being isolated, right. But there's also, again, balance is coddling, is this helicopter mom that is doing too much. At what point, and I don't say that because I understand. I say that because I want to understand.
Well,
At what point do you kind of develop into that, okay, now I've overextended myself and I have become the helicopter mom?
I think that starts probably more into the 3-4-year-old stage, because like through the infant, they are dependent on you.
Right.
They are. About the time they hit, a year and a half, 18 months, you'll start seeing the independence in that child. The toddler's starting to move further away from mom and going further out, testing boundaries, per se.
Yeah.
Running out to the street if they can. But I mean, touching things and doing things on their own, trying to explore. I call it exploring and stuff. And you have to allow them to develop that. Mm-hmm. And there are some moms that can't handle the separation. There's some moms that as the child starts leaving them, they start grabbing hold and pulling them back.
Yeah.
And I think that is, like you said, the helicopter mom, where they come hovering in and overprotecting the child from learning something, and then they try to pull back, and the child gets confused about where can he say no, where can he say yes. The book also mentioned, and this is about the same age group, and I know I was guilty of this. A child has a toy, mm-hmm. and the child's friend's over to play. And that friend wants my child's toy. And so he goes to get it, and my child grabs it and won't let him have it. And we parents jump in and go, oh, now, Johnny, let your friend play with your toy. That's the nice thing to do, But the boy said it was his toy. And he said, no, I don't want you to play with it. And instead of saying to Johnny, okay, Johnny, it's your toy, but do you have another toy your friend can play with that you can share with? Give them choices, or say, can you let your friend play with that one and you go get another toy? Give them some guidance to where he still had the right to say no to the toy he wanted to play, didn't want to share with his friend. Because really what that did was we took the first ability for the child to say no away from him.
But also, it's the ability to play with each other.
Right.
So the reason why establishing these boundaries in a child's life at an early age is because these will be what blossoms out once they are an adult. You establishing a way, like finding another solution that this kid wants to play with this toy, and I don't want to give up that toy. So here's another solution. Go on and do that one, because what I'm learning is to work with others in society, mm-hmm. right? I mean, that's ultimately what you want out of like quality parenting and establishing boundaries, is you want them to go forthrightly into the world to establish themselves where they are able to be a team member, because none of us can do it alone, but they are able to be a team member. And that brings to the next point in establishing relationships, how important relationships are, that there's this fundamental need within each one of us for relationship. And by allowing a different solution to give that toy, it may build a relationship with that kid where then they become friends for a long time.
Right. And, and talk about that. If we as parents never allow our children to say no to us. Now, there's a difference between saying no in a calm manner than saying no in a sarcastic, back-talking manner, okay? Mm. And you have to learn those two things.
Right.
But not giving our kids the ability to say no to us as parents takes away their ability to say no to their friends when their friends want to do something they know they shouldn't. How does a young girl at the age of 12 and 13, I'm sorry, it starts at 12, 13, say no to that boy who's trying to fondle her in a way that's inappropriate? Mm. If you've never given her the ability to have the voice to say no, she's going to struggle with saying no.
Right.
How do you tell that boy when he gets his first offer of drugs to say no if you've never given that child the ability to say no to you?
Well, and that's a sense of confidence. Yeah. A sense of confidence, of self-worth, essentially. Like, I'm valuing my ability to say no out of my protection so that I don't have a traumatic emotional experience. And I think one thing that you could say from this is like, there's an aspect to this of a damaged relationship, right? So the kid on the other end of that, like wanting to play with the toy, or even on the other end, completely polar opposite, where it's the boy that's wanting to fondle the young girl, and maybe they're around the same age, and it's maybe from a sense of him not understanding the boundary yet either.
Right.
And that he learns it by her ability to say no.
Right. Right.
But if there's a helicopter mom involved in that, maybe what can result from that is that there's a sense of codependency within that 13-year-old girl that, Mom, what do I say here? She needs to be able to have that independence to be able to look at that boy that's, again, the same age and say no.
Yeah.
But this boy also needs to have the self-respect and the respect of others, have learned how to play with others, to recognize what's the solution here. Obviously, I need to leave this situation because she told me no, and I need to respect her. I need to respect that my friend isn't going to allow me to play with this toy.
Right.
Those are all the different dynamics in that conversation that are playing into things that you guys can take away from that ability to allow a balance within a child's life so that they go into the world and are able to make their own decisions with confidence and the understanding of their own balance in their own life.
Right. And I think that's where we fail as parents. I know early on in my parenting, when I said no, I meant no, and there was nothing. There was no talk about why I'm saying no. And as I had more children and more things came into my life, I realized that I needed to explain to my kids no. Now, if it's them running to the street and going to get hit by a car and I yell no, I don't have time to explain what that no means. But I do think you have to take your kids back to a point where you go, the reason I said no was because it was going to harm you. Not no because they don't have the right to make a decision. Like, for instance, I know parents get really hung up about, and I remember going through this with you boys haircuts, body piercings, tattoos, dress codes, all those things that as they're coming into, 4th, 5th grade, into middle school, high school. And I never fought you boys about how you wanted to wear your hair. It's not a permanent thing. You can cut it, you can grow it, you can dye it, you can shave it. That was not a concern of mine.
Right.
I didn't care what y'all did with your hair. I did have a boundary of no body piercings until you guys were old enough to realize that hole's going to be in your body for the rest of your life. So you had to be older adult to do body piercings and tattoos. Clothing, as long as it wasn't obscene and immodest, I didn't put boundaries on what you wore. I didn't get upset with whatever you wore.
Would you have allowed the girls to dye their hair or do anything they wanted?
Don't we have a family picture of Quincy in 7th grade with pink hair? Don't you remember her pink hair?
Oh, yeah.
Has that girl ever had the same color hair from year to year, from all through her high school?
No.
Okay. No, yeah.
Maybe for a 3-month period.
Yeah. Did Quincy not shave her hair at one time and went bald?
Yeah, I think that was accidental.
Well, she didn't like the haircut she got, so she just shaved her head.
Yeah.
But did I get upset over that? She was the one that had to be with the bald head. In fact, she wore it rather well, to really be honest with you.
Yeah,
But I didn't upset myself like I've seen so many other parents say, oh, I don't like that on you, can't wear that. Or, no, you're not going to have hair below your collar. Mm-hmm. And I've seen parents doing that, and I'm thinking, give your child the ability to make decisions that don't have an eternal value.
Right.
And that's what I felt like I focused on, especially when you 3 younger ones got older. I focused on boundaries and correction and things like that on, do they have an eternal value to them? Mm-hmm. If it doesn't does your hair have an eternal value? No.
Right.
Does your body piercing have eternal value? No.
So in this early adolescence, maybe it's at like pre-teen stage, this is where like identity starts coming into question a little bit, right?
Yes.
And so like this is when maybe that desire to start getting that face piercing. I mean, I remember Quincy had a cheek piercing one time, right? And that's when that starts coming in. I think, you know, of course I work in a very professional job. So there's if there's permanent decisions made, let's say like facial tattoos, things like that, you're automatically going to be disqualified. And it's not necessarily because of the judginess of culture, but it's more because there's a deeper psychology to everything that people tend to look at very surface level, in that as humans and us wanting to establish relationships, what we're always trying to understand is if the environment that we're in is safe. And who says that the person with the face tattoo is unsafe? Well, my explanation to that wouldn't be that my mom said that that person was unsafe. It was that every movie I watched, the villain had something like that.
Right. They portrayed it that way, yes.
Right. And the problem a lot of times is that it's the attack on the home instead of the attack on Hollywood. And I think too, it's important that you allow the kids to experiment with that stuff at that young age.
Well, nothing permanent. That was my thing with tattoos and body piercings.
Yeah.
It was a permanent thing that cannot be removed. Well, you can't remove them now. But what I'm saying is I didn't want, you had to have been at an age that you understood the consequences. Like, for instance, tattoos 20 years ago was not socially accepted as they are today.
Right.
And so, yes, it did played a factor in your job market and some of the ideology that people had. So I wanted you to understand that if you get that tattoo, there are consequences to the choice that you make.
Right.
And are you willing to realize that you may not be able to be a police officer with tattoos? You may not be able to be a pastor with tattoos. You may not be able to, so you need to realize, and if you get tattoos, put them where nobody can see, that you can wear clothing that covers them so that you can be in that market. Yeah. But that's, I think we fail in teaching our kids those basic things that help them make their own decisions.
Well, that's a boundary right there, is saying like no facial tattoo, no this, no that, because you know that as they go forth into the world, that there is going to be that inherent, per se, I hate saying judgment, because I just said it's not necessarily a judgment. It's just it's a subconscious judgment is what I would say. It's not saying that this person with the facial tattoo is going to be the one to steal the purse from me. Okay.
Right.
But maybe that person with the face tattoo, the subconscious judgment that I make is like, that's the person that's more likely to do it. And so, but in those adolescents, it's important that you allow them to experiment, because the result of the experimentation is that they also see how their peers are evaluating the decisions that they're making, so that when they get into their young adulthood, say at college age, they're no longer, maybe not going to be making those decisions anymore. But you have to have that balance of, not a facial tattoo, those things, but allowing the kid to experiment within their creativity. I would almost say it's almost creativity, right?
Yes,
and
in a lot of ways.
And I think there's also another dynamic to it, that a lot of times it's a seek for attention. And so you have to understand, like, this is such a subjective topic to like individual parenting and children and personalities involved in relationships. But I think that these are some things that a listener could take away from and kind of think about it on a deeper sense, to evaluate their situation, to know how to move forward, to maybe open up that door a little bit at that 9-10-year-old stage, where it's like he wants to get a mohawk haircut. Okay, we're going to let them get a mohawk haircut because I know, 6 weeks from now we can just go back to the flat top or whatever.
Right.
So allowing that to kind of be fluid in your situation, just a very, 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 very subjective. And there's many things that you can take away from it, but it shows too the dynamics of each situation is very dependent on your ability to be aware of yourself and your surroundings to establish those boundaries in a healthy manner with the relationships that you have.
But I still think, again, in developing boundaries starts at a very young age. And you have to give kids freedom to exercise those boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't teach our children how to stand up to peer pressure, stand up to, society's things that maybe we don't necessarily think that are healthy for us or that are pleasing to God. How do we teach our children even to stand up for their right to believe in God and what God has ordained for us to be? If we haven't taught them early on the ability to be able to express themselves and to say, this is my line in the sand, I'm not going to cross it. And I think it's really hard because especially in adolescence, if you stand up to your friend and go, I'm not going to go there, and that friend starts making fun of you, and then you have that feeling of not being accepted, not being a part of. And so you've got to really encourage your kids to say it's okay. It's okay not to be a part of the pack. You can be an individual and be who you are. And but you got to give your kids the ability to do that. I think, too, we miss the boat in explaining emotions to our children and helping them explain. It talks about in the book, the anger is a good emotion because that tells us something's not right.
Right.
Now that could be a self-indulgent thing. Like for me, it was a very, anger came out of hurt and what's the other one?
Selfishness?
No. Anger emotions usually are governed by two emotions. It's either hurt or fear.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. And if we don't teach our children to be able to talk, like when they get angry, the 3-year-old that throws a tantrum on the floor, you can't do anything about the tantrum during the process of the tantrum. And I was one that would just let you throw a tantrum. I would just step over you and walk away. I wasn't one of those parents that would pick you up and try to talk you out of that tantrum. Let him throw it. If he wants to look like a dummy in the mall throwing a tantrum, let him look like the dummy. It didn't bother me that you threw a tantrum. And like I said, you threw them. You were the only one of my kids that actually threw tantrums. And I would just say, take it to your room. I don't care if you throw a tantrum, but take it to your room. But I always wanted to talk about it when you came back out and to talk about the emotions that you were feeling that made you go into that tantrum. And sometimes I had to own up to the fact that it was something that I didn't allow or I said and apologize and say, I'm sorry. I didn't understand that was upsetting you.
You're validating the emotions.
Right. And so, I learned that as time went on. I learned that through me learning about my own issues with anger but I think that we as parents, even in our age of 20s and 30s and having kids, we want us to look good to other people.
Everybody around us, yes. We want to look like the best parent.
Like talking about, driving up to church and my beat-up van and 7 kids unloading out that minivan, and by golly, all of us look good.
Yeah.
Hair's
combed over,
and all that. And we're going to church because I wanted people to look and go, she's got it together.
Yeah.
We cared more about what other people think about ourselves and about our children than we care about what our child feels and thinks. And growing them up like that only creates more and more society problems. Yeah. Get over caring about what other people think. Look real, people. Look real. I mean,
carry yourself real too, though.
Yes.
Like, when you're speaking to somebody, look at them in the eye, like, because you know there's that essential need of relationship.
Yes.
I want to develop this relationship with this person, or even test to see if my surroundings are safe with this person. I want to evaluate that. So I want to look at them in the eyes, and I want to evaluate everything going on in this conversation so that I know if I can trust this person.
Mm-hmm. And we raise kids with the inability to know what to do.
Do you think people saw the facade?
Well, sure. The people that were struggling with it themselves.
Yeah.
And really all it takes is, I can remember the first time somebody said something to me about being a single mom and all the kids dressed and stuff. And I says, well, I'm going to admit to you, it's war zone before we get here. I mean, that was the good honest truth. It's a war zone before we get here. We look good when we get here, but it was a battle and a war before we got here.
Right.
We come in looking good, but there was a war at home. And that wasn't right. And so as your kids grew older, I allowed you more and more freedom to dress like you want to dress, wear your hair the way you wanted to wear your hair. The only thing I asked is that you were clean.
Yeah.
Did you shower? Did you brush your teeth? Then I didn't really care if your clothes didn't exactly match. I didn't like it. My OCD part of me says, that doesn't really go together, but oh well. Yeah. Like holy jeans. Oh well.
Right.
I just let it go. But inside I'm going, I hate it. But I had to let you kids experience that. Even when everyone, well, Daisha didn't. But all you boys pushed a boundary with the laws. All four of you.
Yeah.
Pushed boundaries with the law.
Mm-hmm.
And every boundary you push with the law, I let you fall just enough.
Mm-hmm.
Brock more than the rest, but because he pushed it and pushed it and pushed it until he...
Well, he continued to go back, and that was his choice. And I think that brings to probably the final topic is we always have to talk about it, but it's personal responsibility.
Yes.
Him owning that. You owning your position as a mother to validate the child emotionally. You owning that you don't have it all together and you can put on this facade to all of these people. Every decision that we make is going to either establish that boundary in our children's lives, our lives, or it's going to be detrimental and it's going to be a trauma that's going to be resulting from us not evaluating what's the proper decision.
And I validated this in Brock probably by the time he's in his mid-teens, and I knew that there was a lot of trauma in his life through childhood. I realized that as a first mom with him, I was harsher on him, and I didn't allow him. I think, because Daisha was sick, Rusty was sick with asthma a lot, Brock kind of got a little left behind, and I acknowledged that. And then as he grew older, the divorce was very detrimental to him and stuff. And so, by the time he was 16, I was recognizing those things. The damage had already been done, and all I could do was help him start taking responsibility even for his action, even if what he's coming from is not a good thing. So, and it took years for him to get to that place, but I did what I could as a parent, trying to get the help he could. But bottom line is he had to take personal responsibility. At one point, he took personal responsibility. And, we all, I don't know anybody that doesn't come out of childhood with some kind of stuff. They're just because, parents are parenting with what they know. And if they didn't have good parenting, they parent not good, and you hope that they develop and they learn as they go too. But like you said, you get to a certain age of accountability, as we call it. If you don't start taking personal responsibility for your own life, it's going to be a train wreck. Mm-hmm. Bottom line, it's going to be a train wreck. No matter how your childhood looked, no matter how hard things may be, if you don't take personal responsibility, your life is going to be a train wreck.
Quit packing your baggage. literally open up the suitcase and throw it all out on the floor
Right.
and look at every piece of clothing, every piece of baggage that you have, and look at it in the deepest stinking parts to understand the meaning and the reason, the whys, the hows, and then you can move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still, to this day at 66, have these kind of issues with boundaries. And I'll just be honest with this.
Yeah.
I still have the want to please people. That sometimes I allow my time to be consumed, or I allow myself to say yes when I really should be saying no in a situation, being passive in some things. And there's a lot of times that I just find myself in a quiet spot and I'm praying to the Lord to give me courage to say no, because I want to still please people. It's innate for me that I want to please people. I want people to be happy.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I give up what would be good for me personally in order for them to feel okay with whatever.
Well, and take it beyond just pleasing other people, but pleasing God.
Yes.
You know, God established a boundary for us to wait till marriage for sex.
Right.
And as a man, I still struggle.
Yeah.
Every day, every woman I talk to, I'm like, would I have sex with her? And that shouldn't be my first thought. But I'm still tempted. I'm still struggling.
And I wish more Christians would admit to that to other people, especially people that don't know who Jesus is. Just be gut honest and say, by the grace of God, I can refrain. But it's only through the grace of God that I can stay steadfast in my conviction. And let them know you still struggle every day with that.
If God is with us, who can be against us?
Yeah.
Let out all of the stuff that you experience. Like it's okay to be tempted. Jesus was tempted.
Yeah.
Throw yourself off this mountain and I'll give you the world. He already had the world.
Right. But all of us, even today, I still have temptation. At 66, there's still temptation in my life. As we get older, I'll admit to this even. There's temptations that I know I probably really ought not do that. But I know I'm already going to do it.
Yeah. Like, you're going to make the bad decision.
Yeah.
And then it reminds me of Romans chapter 6. What shall we say then? Shall we go on saying so that grace may abound? By no means. I always think about that when I'm like, yeah, I know I'm about to do it, because I'm thinking I'm about to go on sinning so that grace may abound.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean to continue sinning, but there are battles within each one of us.
Yeah, we all have them. There's not one person out there that doesn't have a battle. And I think if we as a Christian society would be a little bit more opened to show the world that we struggle with that stuff and that God's grace and mercy is the only thing saving us, how many more people would we reach?
How would the relationships be impacted if we were 100% real and we gave all of it to God?
Right.
That's the biggest hurt in the church. Is that when somebody walks into a church and they look around the pews and they're obviously all tatted up and they got dangling piercings from their nose to their ear, and 98% of the people in those pews are not looking at that person the way Jesus does.
No, we don't.
We're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
But if that person knew that relationship.
And this, I'm going to say this. When I look at Brock, let's look at Brock. He's got some tattoos on his body, and the consequences of some of those tattoos is he became ashamed of them after he got to know Jesus. And he's tried to cover them up with other tattoos. But I know appearance-wise, when you look at Brock, this guy is into hard Christian rock.
It's not rock, it's heavy metal.
It's heavy metal. Okay, it's that screaming deep throat. I can't understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
And he's got tattoos. And he wears a lot of black T-shirts. The guy is reptile. And I'm not talking reptiles like in lizards. I mean snakes, tarantula spiders.
I promise you, he has more snakes in his living room than 3/4 of your guys' reptile exhibits at your local zoo.
Yes. But anybody to see him outwardly would immediately go, oh, he's a no good. He's a no good. And yet I know that he loves Jesus.
Yeah.
And he exudes that. And he's the first one to tell you he's a screw up. You know, that he makes mistakes and he doesn't get it all right. But he loves Jesus and he tries every day to continue pleasing God.
I think that it really just goes to show in your situation. Of course, I'm part of that. But how God had his hand in everything.
He did.
know?
He did.
Just
And you know, and I think that's where my gratefulness to God comes from, because I didn't do it right.
right.
I didn't do it right. All I knew is that God was important. My relationship with Jesus was important. And I had to try the best I could to show my kids that. And I didn't do it right.
And you prayed for us.
I prayed for you. I still
And
pray for you.
And you had trust that God would establish the boundaries in our lives.
Yes.
All righty, guys. I think that's all we got.
Okay.
I think that was really good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Gets a little emotional sometimes.
I know. Yeah,
You know?
I get emotional too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've teared up a few times on the podcast, but I really hope that like the listeners understand like this whole platform is predicated on realness, rawness, and the articulation of understanding why we struggle as human beings. And maybe we can find some solutions to the problems individually that then plays out into culture, that impacts other people so that they understand the relationship that Jesus desires to have with us and how that plays out into the world.
Right. One more thing I'll say this, and you know, I do Bible studies occasionally for women, and I had a small group of women, and I was just sharing part of my testimony and some things that I had gone through and how God showed up. And one of the ladies looked at me and said, "Were you living for the Lord when that was going on?" No, I wasn't.
Yeah.
But that was the faithfulness of God in that.
He wants you so dang bad.
Yeah. That's called mercy.
All righty, guys. If you could, please go ahead and follow us over on Instagram, Facebook, where you're going to get daily post updates about what's going on the Pursuing Truth podcast. Shoot us a follow on Spotify so that you know when a new episode comes out. Mom and I do these episodes every other week. On the off week is SNL Hot Takes, and periodically you guys will get a Braincast, where that's just a general solo episode of me sharing something that's on my heart. Those release on Monday at 6 a.m., and then Real Talk radio show episodes release on Wednesdays at 6 a.m. So some weeks, like this week, you had an episode on Monday at 6 a.m.,
Yeah.
Wednesday 6 a.m., and Friday 6 a.m.
And you have a job.
And I have a job, and I create content for all of these platforms. Guys, I am committed to this message right here. These conversations Mom and I are having, the conversations Rusty and I had, the conversations Brock and I have had, the list goes on with over 20 guests that I've had on the podcast. It's always in seek of a guest that is 100% raw and willing to have that conversation that shows you as a listener, you are not alone in this crazy war of life.
Right. Right. That's what relationship's about. Can't do it alone.
Yep.
Can't do it alone.
Leave an Apple Podcast review. Please share this episode if you enjoyed the conversation Mom and I had today about boundaries. That will help it grow. And I really think this was probably the best one so far. And I think it will continue to get better as we go on. And I think that we also stayed on topic very well talking about children.
Pretty much.
All righty. Well, you guys have a great rest of your week, and God bless.